Welcome back. You're watching PVO News Hour. I'm here in the nation's capital ahead of Joe Hockey's budget. He'll deliver it tomorrow night. But I'm trying to get a bit of a lie of the land down here, talk to a few backbenchers, talk to a few front benches as well. One we're going to talk to right now is the Assistant Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Thanks for joining me.
Nice to be with you, Peter.
Disastrous budget last year. You're hoping for a good budget this year. I can only see one change in the finance team, and it's you.
No, that's not right. We've got a whole suite of new officials. We've got Jane Holton in finance, Michael Thorley in PM&C.
But amongst the political class, Treasurer's the same, Finance Minister's the same, but the Assistant Treasurer is new, and what do you know? A new lease on life ahead of the budget. Do you take some credit?
And we've also got Scott Morrison, who's a new member of the ERC, but no...
I thought you were going to say new Treasurer. I thought we had an exclusive here on PVO News Hour with all the speculation.
Look, Peter, the ERC's been working, I think, very effectively for some time. We've learnt some of the lessons from last year's budget, but let's also not downplay some of the achievements of last year's budget, namely 75% of the measures were legislated. That meant that the debt trajectory Australia was on under Labor has been halved. That's a significant achievement, and there's still a lot to go.
Can I ask you about that? The whole debt trajectory argument, it feels like an overweight person saying my diet is going well because I only put on 5 kilos this week, whereas last week I put on 10. I mean, you're still getting fatter, you're not getting healthier.
Well, you're right to say that the debt problem has not been solved, but it actually has been reduced over the next few decades, and that's a significant achievement, but it's not good enough and it's not far enough. We've still got a lot of work to do. We're struggling in the Senate, no doubt about it. We need to get 6 out of those 8 crossbenchers, and we put some good policies up. One of them is close to your heart in higher education. It was knocked back a couple of times. We'll continue to try again. But we have to hold firm, which is fiscal consolidation is important, but also investing in productivity-linked measures, which we've seen with childcare and others.
I want to talk to you about some of the lessons learned that you mentioned earlier, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about some of the news of the day, this GST expansion onto things like Netflix in this online space. A lot of people are welcoming it, but it's a broken promise, isn't it? The Prime Minister said exactly these words, no change to the GST. This is obviously a change to the GST.
Well, this is not an increase in the rate nor an increase in the base of the GST.
But it's a change.
No, this is effectively just ensuring that a loophole has been closed.
Which is a change.
Well, when the GST came in, Peter, nobody could foresee the expansion in these online sales.
You've got to let me jump in though, Josh Frydenberg, because I accept that completely. I'm not disagreeing with what changes you're making, but the Prime Minister didn't say there will be no change to the GST back then when we couldn't foresee what was coming. He said it recently, literally a matter of weeks and months ago, and repeated it a number of times. This is a change, even if you and I might agree that it's a good one.
I think this is a modernisation of our tax approach, and we can debate the semantics all night, and you and I have done that before.
We could sit here all night, and you would refuse to call it a change to the GST.
Look, I'm just saying this is an upgrade to our tax system to take into account the increased volume of sales of so-called intangibles, of services into Australia. This has been welcomed by the Australian National Retailers Association, by the CPA.
It's a good change to the GST.
It's a good improvement.
All right. Let's move on to something else then. Scott Morrison. Now, he has been up and about. Now, I'm not as critical as some commentators have been about that. It's his portfolio, for heaven's sake,
good on him.
That's right in the mix. And no harm done if he's involved. But do you at least agree, not in the speculation about him replacing Joe Hockey if the budget falls flat, I don't want to get into that. Do you at least accept, though, that Joe Hockey has to do a better job this year than he did last year? And you all do, in a way.
Look, I accept that we need to convey our message about what we are trying to achieve differently to what we did last year. But I think, Joe Hockey has done very well in difficult circumstances, particularly the fact that there's pressure on the revenue side with the halving of the iron ore price, which is 1/3 of our exports.
Remember Labor complaining about sort of similar problems?
Well, they had the highest terms of trade in 140 years, so they had nothing to complain about. In fact, revenue went up 22%.
But when they came into power in 2007, commodity prices were lower than they are now.
Well, they enjoyed the highest terms of trade in 140 years. That's not something we've enjoyed. But so Joe Hockey's been dealing with difficulties on the revenue side. He's got difficulties in the Senate. I think he'll do a very good job tomorrow night and indeed in the weeks after selling the budget.
Let's talk about the Senate. Now, are they unrepresentative swill? and frustrating micro parties that don't have mandates, that block a government with a fair mandates agenda, or did they save you from yourselves? You're all acknowledging that you've learned things and that in hindsight you bit off more than you could chew. Is that your way of saying thanks to Labor, thanks to the Greens and thanks to the crossbenchers? Because without you, we might have instituted policies that we now realise were wrong.
No, I don't think they saved us from ourselves. I think what they have done is they've obviously scrutinised our policies, and they haven't shared the same views that we have about what is in the best interests of the economy going forward. It's a reality check, I suppose, and therefore we have to deal with it as it is, not as we would like the Senate to be.
But things like the changed indexation of pensions and the co-payment for Medicare would be law right now if it wasn't for the Senate.
But they would have still produced major savings over the future years and would have helped that debt trajectory.
I don't disagree with that, and quite frankly, particularly the Medicare co-payment, I have no problem with.
Sure.
More sceptical about the indexation to pensions. I'm glad that's been changed, and I like the new version of savings that Scott Morrison is looking for. But my point, though, is that you guys would have made those policies law, and unashamedly so, yet you're now saying, with an act of contrition, that you were wrong about them all. You've got to give the Senate credit for that.
I don't think you should overstate that in trying to say to us that this is an act of contrition. What we're saying is that we put up good policies that we thought were in the best interest of the economy. Now, they didn't get through. Now, we have been forced, in the case of the pensions, to reconfigure our policy settings so that we can achieve savings while also getting fairer pensions.
But do you think that's a better version, the one now, or the original one that you couldn't get through the Senate?
Look, I'd say it's a different version with changes to the taper rates, changes to the assets-free area. There are obviously winners and there are losers. You will see you'll see us be pragmatic about what we have to do. But when you go back to the senators, I mean, today I've spoken to Nick Xenophon, I've spoken to Ricky Muir, I've spoken to David Leonhelm and Glenn Lazarus. I mean, we're continually, as ministers, speaking to the crossbenchers about particular pieces of legislation.
You've got to have a chat to Christopher Pyne. I mean, if Glenn Lazarus is prepared to talk to you, he's doing something wrong. I mean, Glenn Lazarus won't speak to him. I think they've had one conversation since, in fairness. Mr. Pyne told me that. But, Glenn Lazarus treated him like some irritating child trying to chat to him. I think that's rude. I think that for a senator in this country, crossbench, independent, even Palmer United Party, as he was back then, to talk the way he did about Christopher Pyne is frankly a disgrace.
Well, look, we all have to treat each other in this place, Labor, Liberal, crossbenchers or government. We have to treat each other with respect and we have to at least hear each other out.
Okay, I want to ask you about one of your particular areas that you've been looking at, the fringe benefit tax cap for doctors. They're not happy about it.
Well, look, we think this is again a pragmatic save that Labor will support because they've supported changes to the fringe benefit tax concessions in the past. If you work in the not-for-profit sector, including a not-for-profit hospital or a public hospital, you're incentivised to work there as opposed to in the private sector by getting FBT concessions. Now, for meal and entertainment expenses, they were uncapped. So we had evidence from the Productivity Commission, which did a report, and also a Treasury working group, which did a report to the previous Labor government, which said that there was real abuse going on in terms of this concession, people putting their 40th birthdays on, people overclaiming.
So no more long lunches in the not-for-profit sector?
What we've said is we can understand the rationale for this, but rather than having it uncapped, let's have a $5,000 growth.
We think is reasonable. And I'm here in the nation's capital, and the splash in today's Australian, the nation's national broadsheet. I also work for it as a disclaimer. It suggests that there will be more cuts to the public service. Is it going to be tough times ahead for Canberrans?
Well, look, this is about getting efficiencies for taxpayers because
most voters will agree with you about this.
But we believe, smaller government is often more efficient government. Now, the Commission of Audit did a survey, Peter, of all the statutory authorities and government agencies and all sorts of committees, and it said you couldn't even keep count. It was well over 1,000. Now, we have taken the advice of the Commission of Audit and started to consolidate this. Matthias Coleman has led the charge. What he has tried to do is create a contestability framework to ask the question, could a job be better done by the private sector? Is there duplication between government agencies and departments? If so, then savings can be made.
Well, a lot of this should be in the Federation Reform White Paper, shouldn't it? I mean, I wanted to ask you that. I asked the Finance Minister yesterday the same question in a sense, but so much is getting put in to the forward estimates and the need to try to target a return to surplus. It's going to take time. We're still getting fatter, but just not as quickly. But eventually we might get there. But all of that becomes irrelevant when the premise is stripped away, which is Federation white paper, tax white paper. If you take to the next election a package to respond to that, the forward estimates get blown up because the premise to them all becomes irrelevant.
Well, I actually don't think what we're trying to do with the tax white paper and the Federation white paper are mutually exclusive from the measures you'll see in the budget. I don't accept that. I mean, what the Federation...
So we'll see some early signs, will we, on some of these reforms in the budget?
What we're seeing, for example, with the Federation white paper is a structural look at how much the states are raising and what they are spending it on, if there is duplication and consolidation that can take place. I mean, COAG is a good vehicle for that, but we needed a more holistic approach, and that's what the Federation white paper is about. The tax white paper, we've given ourselves a long runway here because Ken Henry did a report, Ralph did a report, the Asprey inquiry back in the early 70s have been done, but we actually need to look at the whole tax system in Australia and ask the question, why are we relying overly on income and company tax? Why is bracket creep underpinning government revenue going forward? Because effectively it's not good for the economy.
You're doing more in the company tax space because you're trying to catch the multinationals.
Yes, but what we're trying to do there is an integrity measure, to be honest, Peter, and what we're going to do tomorrow night is give a tax cut to small business.
But the Coalition always talks about simplicity in the tax system.
Sure. It's not simple.
No, but Peter Costello thinks it's a morbid joke for the government to do so. Isn't it just becoming more complicated when we see, and this is one of the few areas we haven't seen some details on yet, but when we see tomorrow night, let's be honest about this, the two-tier system for small and large businesses that will exist in the company tax rate, that's complex.
Well, we want to give it the small business community a tax cut, and we can't afford to give it over the entire business community.
So you make it more complex as a result?
So what we do is we take the opportunity now to give small business a tax cut, but what we say is we actually want to give a tax cut, Peter, to all companies, and when the budget is in a position to do that, we will. I mean, what we have to understand with capital and labour being so mobile today and global supply chains really challenging and eroding our company tax base, that we have to be competitive. And at 30%, we're not competitive because in Singapore, their company tax rate is 17%. In Ireland, it's 12%. And we don't want to see investment in Australia go offshore. But if you probably read Hearts and Minds by the Shadow Treasurer...
Easy read, very small book.
Very small book, easy read, easy to forget. He's got a line in there where he actually supports...
You haven't forgotten it, you're now quoting it. You can't say it's easy to forget and then start quoting the book.
It is quotable, especially in Parliament. But he actually supports a two-tier company tax system. So we had the embarrassing situation the other day where a Labor shadow frontbencher came out saying, why are you going down with a two-tier company tax system? Bruce Bilson put out a press release and said, haven't you read Hearts and Minds?
What's more embarrassing? A Labor person criticising your two-tier tax system when their own Shadow Treasurer had written something in favour of it, or you guys copying the Labor Shadow Treasurer with a two-tier tax system?
No, look, we are doing what...
Is that where you got the idea? You read Hearts and Minds, you underlined it, and you went and had a tap on Joe Hockey's door when you became Assistant Treasurer and said, look, you know what, not a bad idea. We should talk to Chris Bowen more often.
Peter, there are a lot of things to avoid in Chris Bowen's book, I could tell you.
Yeah, all right. Before I let you go, one last try. This change to the GST in relation to the Netflix situation is a good one?
I think it is.
A good change to the GST?
No, I think it's a good modernised, good try.
All right, Josh Frydenberg, always appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Great to be with you, Peter.
Actually, are you going to give us a budget exclusive? Is there anything new in this thing before I let you go? I mean, I'm here, I'm going to get my mobile taken away from me, my iPad forced onto flight mode, no access to the outside world, terrible catering, no offence to the parliamentary staff here, and there we will be for budget lockup from, I think, what is it, 1:30 till 7:30 or thereabouts?
And then you can push send.
But will there be new things in it, or will I walk in there and just be deeply frustrated because I've read it all in orchestrated leaks?
Look, there will be more to say, particularly around the jobs package, which hasn't been out there, as well as the small business package, because that's the centrepiece of this year's budget.
All right. As I say, Josh Frydenberg, appreciate your time.
Nice to be with you.
Stay with us here on the program. When we come back, we will have one Labor backbencher and one, well, actually, he's a frontbencher now. He was a backbencher when I first spoke to him, as well as a Liberal Party backbencher. As I said before, they're treated like mushrooms. They don't get to see the budget any earlier than the rest of us. We'll see what they think about it.